On today's show, the first three banks merge after restructuring policy. Christmas decorations market 20% price increase still rakes in sales. And later on, wooden furniture businesses return to home markets.
Hello and welcome to Vietnam in Focus. We're going to keep you up to date with what's going on in Vietnam, especially the business world.
And do stay tuned here on our program as we'll meet many faces and hear the voices of market players and policymakers here in the country. I'm Thu Seung.
And I'm Quốc Khánh. You're watching Vietnam in Focus.
Please join us in a discussion with Dr. Sundar Venkatesh, an advisor to the director of the Asian Institute of Technology, AIT, in Thailand. Now, he is currently a visiting faculty at the Vietnam National University.
Well, specializing in financial analysis, corporate finance, management controls, and corporate governance, Dr. Venkatesh is here to tell us about how a business could select the most suitable financial partner. Hello, you're watching Vietnam in Focus. As introduced earlier, following up is the discussion between our host Thomas Maraska and Dr. Sundar Venkatesh of the Asian Institute of Technology, AIT.
Let's join the two now right here on Vietnam in Focus.
Dr. Sundar Venkatesh is an adjunct faculty in the School of Management at the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. He's visiting faculty at Vietnam National University's Center for International Education and the Maastricht School of Management Executive MBA program in Vietnam. Dr. Venkatesh is a chartered accountant. He holds a PhD from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, one of the top schools in the region. He is also conducting several case studies on financing challenges facing high-growth companies in Vietnam. Dr. Sundar Venkatesh, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So you gave a presentation recently at a conference, Companies Finding a Financial Partner, which is a very relevant topic in Vietnam, both for small and medium enterprises and as well as larger kind of privatizing state-owned companies. There's a lot of interest in this topic. What are the basic, what did you basically say about local companies in terms of what they should be looking for in financial partners?
The 4C framework that I emphasized in the seminar is pretty useful for companies to hold on to when they try to find a financing partner. One is cost, the second is control, the third is convenience, and the fourth is contribution. Cost is pretty obvious, it's the interest rate, but there are a lot of hidden costs that many companies are not aware of. Control comes with a lot of the conditions that go into the borrowing agreement, and in my experience, especially the SMEs are not very mindful of these control conditions, and mostly they look at convenience because there is a shortage of sources for SME financing in Vietnam, and wherever they can get money easily, that's where they like to go. But financial partners, such as the CF Blue Waters Fund, which sponsored the seminar, also provide a lot of contribution, both by being on the board and advising on strategy, and also giving access to product markets, which these companies can benefit from.
You had mentioned some cost issues. How does that come into play?
Well, the example that I cited at the conference was of Hoang Anh Gia Lai, which raised $90 million in Singapore in May 2011. And they paid something like 10 kinds of fees. And I believe this includes the marketing and the underwriting fee. Now you spread 10% over a 5-year period, which was the term of the loan. It actually pushes up the cost of the loan substantially. So Hoang Anh Gia Lai paid 9.25% as coupon rate on a US dollar borrowing. But then you add this 10% upfront cost, the overall cost of the borrowing goes up to something like 13% per year on a US dollar borrowing. So these upfront costs, as I call them, they can substantially change the effective cost that companies have to bear, and companies have to be aware of this when they negotiate a loan.
This is something you think that maybe Vietnamese companies are less aware of in terms of not having the long experience of dealing with foreign investment, or is this something that kind of applies across the board?
It's certainly, in this market, it's buyer beware, and financiers will do their best to get a good deal. And it's up to the firms to get good advice on how to negotiate with these financing firms. But I would believe that since convenience is the C that most SMEs look for, I think they do not pay very close attention to the cost, especially the hidden costs.
Right, and you mentioned control as well. What are some issues that come up in terms of ceding more control than you intended to these foreign investors? What happens there?
Well, two very prominent examples of ceding control are how to pay dividends and what kind of investments can you make in the future. Many financiers would like to be very careful with their company's dividend policy. It's easy for the shareholders to pay out large dividends and leave the financiers high and dry. So especially when there's financing involved, the financier would like to put a limit on the dividends. The other kind of restriction that usually comes with debt type of financing is restriction on the investment policies. So companies are not free to invest where they like and in what they like. And so financiers keep a very close watch on this. This may not be necessarily a bad thing, but what I would suggest to SMEs is that they be aware of this when they get into a partnership with a financier.
And how do you recommend SMEs going about approaching, finding a good financial partner?
I think the value of good advice is not appreciated. So most SMEs would like to, get their hands on the funds and get on with the business as quickly as possible. But sometimes, these financing arrangements can be a little binding and a little burdensome as they go along. So my advice to SMEs is to get a good advisor on your side who can talk to you about these 4 C's. These can be retired people from the banks, who can help you understand how these financiers are working. So getting good advice upfront is always a good thing.
Do those resources exist in abundance in Vietnam? I mean, is it easy to find somebody to give you advice?
This would be hard for me to say, but certainly there is a lot of expertise out in the market, and certainly people who have worked in on the other side, on the financier side, so to speak, would be good sources of advice. And so I guess SMEs would have to look around. Of course, this is also an opportunity for many of the people who worked in financial services but want to branch out to other lines of work, to take on an advisory role and help SMEs negotiate a better deal.
You mentioned that SMEs are turning to these outside financiers just because it's so difficult to get a bank loan. Do you see the credit markets loosening up anytime? Where do you see this going?
So some of us published a research article a couple of years back which showed that getting bank financing requires strong networking in Vietnam. And most of the big loans go to large companies, usually the state-owned enterprises. So, the financial markets are not sophisticated enough in Vietnam to cater to a wide variety of needs. For example, companies in trouble, financial trouble, would find it very hard to get financing in Vietnam, even though their business models may not necessarily be bad. So, my impression is that if SMEs want to access financing, they would have to cast their net wide. And some of the funds, such as the CF Blue Waters Fund, provide alternatives to bank financing and on a variety of terms that are more suited to the SMEs.
And are you seeing a greater interest from these outside funds to come into Vietnam? What's your take on that?
Certainly. I think if you see the number of deals in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a tremendous amount of interest in the Vietnamese market. So let's face it, it's a growing economy. There are tremendous opportunities for growth. Vietnam is a strongly entrepreneurial culture. People have the drive to take business to greater heights. I think financing has been a bottleneck, and a lot of international financiers, especially the funds, are recognizing this and are coming into Vietnam in a significant way.
Dr. Sundar Venkatesh, thank you again for your time.